This is HOA outplayed. The stop work notice hit before the first board was set. Angela pointed at a fence panel in my driveway and screamed that staging materials was blight. Your excuses are not my problem, she said, jabbing her finger toward the single panel leaning against my garage door. I stood there holding a gate hinge I had just pulled out of my truck, my pest control work van still warm from the drive home, and I tried to understand what was happening. The fence panel had been there for maybe 20 minutes, delivered early by a contractor who was supposed to drop the full load tomorrow. Angela Harris, president of the Lakeshore Landing Commons Association, wore a gray visor and a black cardigan, even though it was a cool evening in Albany, New York, and she had a badge clip on her collar with nothing readable on it. She held a stack of printed photos like she was about to present evidence in court. Angela waved the photos. I have documentation of this violation as of 4:17 this afternoon, she said. You are staging construction materials in a visible location without board approval. That is a $200 fine per day until removal. I looked at the panel. It is one piece of wood, I said. The contractor dropped it off early. The rest comes tomorrow. Angela shook her head. The staging policy does not care about timing. Visible materials are blight. You should have applied for a construction permit 3 weeks ago. I felt my jaw tighten. I did apply, I said. I submitted the fence application on March 2nd. You told me it was under review. Angela smiled, thin and cold. Under review means you wait for approval, she said. It does not mean you start work. I work as a pest control technician, and I keep detailed service logs for every job, every site visit, every communication. It is a habit that saved me more than once when a client claimed I missed a treatment or showed up late. So when Angela started talking about staging violations and unapproved construction, I knew I had records. But I also knew that fighting her in the driveway was not going to end this. Angela had been HOA president for 3 years, and she ran the association like a personal kingdom. Every rule was her rule. Every decision was her decision, and every violation was an opportunity to remind you that she was in charge. A landscaping contractor was trimming hedges 2 houses down, pretending not to listen, but I saw him glance over every few seconds. Angela turned and raised her voice so he could hear. I will make an example out of you so everyone learns, she said. If I let you slide, then everyone will think they can stage materials and ignore the process. I swallowed my anger, because I knew the moment to use it was coming. I had already filed my fence application weeks ago. I had already received a verbal acknowledgement from the previous property manager that my plan was compliant, and I had already started gathering documents because Angela had a history of rewriting the rules mid-conflict. But right now, standing in my driveway with a gate hinge in my hand and a single fence panel behind me, I needed to stay calm. The stakes were real. I was in the middle of a big contract, a multi-site pest control job for a commercial property group that required weekly visits and meticulous reporting. Any distraction, any missed appointment, any gap in my schedule could cost me the contract and the steady income that came with it. Angela knew that. She knew I worked long hours and that my time was stretched thin. And she knew that an HOA fight would eat into that time. Angela tapped the stack of photos. These are time-stamped, she said. 4:17. Your panel was visible from the street. That is the violation. I pointed at the timestamp on the top photo. 4:17, I said. The contractor called me at 4:20 to say he dropped it early. So you took the photo before he even told me it was here. Angela did not blink. That is not my problem, she said. The violation exists the moment the material is visible. Your timing does not change the rule. I felt the anger rising, but I kept my voice level. So what do you want me to do? I said. Move it inside the garage right now? Angela shook her head. No, she said. You need to submit a remediation plan to the board and wait for approval. Until then, the fine accrues daily. I stared at her. You want me to submit a plan to move one fence panel, I said, and wait for the board to approve it, while the fine keeps adding up. Angela smiled again. Now you are starting to understand, she said. The process exists for a reason. I turned and walked to the panel, picked it up with both hands, and carried it into the garage. It took 15 seconds. I came back out, brushed my hands off, and looked at Angela. Done, I said. Violation remediated. Do you need a photo for your records? Angela did not move, Your camera does not matter, she said. My minutes are the truth. The fine stands until the board reviews your remediation and votes to accept it. That could take 2 weeks. I will send you the invoice tomorrow. She turned and walked toward the sidewalk, her gray visor bobbing slightly. I watched her go, my hands still tingling from carrying the panel. The landscaping contractor 2 houses down shook his head and went back to trimming. I went inside and sat down at my kitchen table with my laptop. I opened my email and found the fence application I had submitted on March 2nd. I had included diagrams, measurements, a list of materials, and a reference to the HOA fence guidelines in the Lakeshore Landing Commons rulebook. I had received a reply from the property management company 2 days later confirming receipt and saying the application was compliant and would be forwarded to the board. I took a screenshot of that email and saved it to a folder I was already building called HOA Evidence. The next morning, I woke up to find a yellow envelope taped to my front door. Inside was a printed notice on Lakeshore Landing Commons Association letterhead with no readable text visible, but the tone was clear. It accused me of starting construction without approval and cited 3 separate rule violations: staging materials, unapproved construction, and failure to notify adjacent property owners. The notice said I had 5 days to submit a written response, or the association would proceed with a lien filing. I read it twice, standing on my front step in the cool morning air, and I realized Angela was not playing a game. She was building a paper trail to justify something bigger. I called the property management company that handled Lakeshore Landing Commons and asked to speak to someone about the notice. A woman named Diane answered and said she would look into it. I explained that I had submitted my application weeks ago, that it had been acknowledged as compliant, and that Angela was now claiming I had violated multiple rules. Diane put me on hold for 3 minutes, then came back and said the board had decided to reset the review process because new concerns had been raised about setback compliance. I asked what new concerns. Diane said she was not at liberty to discuss board deliberations, but I could submit a written request for clarification. I hung up and called a local mediator I had worked with on a commercial lease dispute a year earlier. His name was Paul, and he was good at explaining how to keep conflicts legally clean without letting the other side steamroll you. Paul listened to the whole story, then said one thing that stuck with me. If they are resetting deadlines, he said, they are trying to run out the clock on something. You need to figure out what they are avoiding. I asked him what he meant. Paul said that in HOA disputes, the most common reason for delay tactics was financial mismanagement. If someone was covering missing money or unapproved expenses, they would create distractions to keep homeowners focused elsewhere. I thanked him and hung up, my mind already racing. That afternoon, my backyard gate stopped working. I went out to check it because I had a service technician coming later that day to inspect a pest control installation on my back patio, and the gate was my only access path for equipment. The latch was jammed, the hinges were stiff, and when I finally forced it open, I found that someone had driven a survey stake into the ground directly in the path of the gate swing. The stake had a bright orange flag on it, and there was fresh dirt around the base like it had been placed recently. I pulled out my phone and took photos of the stake, the gate, and the surrounding area. Then I called the property management company again and asked if they had authorized a survey. Diane said the board had requested a boundary survey to verify setback compliance for my fence project, and the surveyor had been instructed to mark the property line. I asked why no one had notified me. Diane said notification was not required for association-initiated surveys. I asked if the surveyor was supposed to block my gate. Diane said she would pass my concern along to the board. I spent the next hour pulling the stake out of the ground and resetting the gate so it would open. The service technician arrived just as I finished, and I walked him through to the back patio without mentioning the HOA drama. But after he left, I sat down and wrote a formal response to the yellow notice Angela had taped to my door. I cited my original application, the acknowledgement email, the lack of notification about the survey, and the fact that Angela had taken photos of the staging violation before the contractor even notified me. I printed the response, attached copies of my application and the acknowledgement email, and hand-delivered it to the property management office before they closed. The next day, Angela showed up at my door again. This time she had a clipboard and a printed ledger with no readable text visible, just rows of numbers and dates. She said the board had reviewed my response and determined that I had failed to notify adjacent property owners before starting construction. I said I had not started construction. Angela tapped the clipboard. You staged materials, she said. That is the start of construction under our guidelines, and you did not notify your neighbors. That is a separate violation. I felt my patience slipping. I moved one panel into my garage the same day it arrived, I said. There was no construction. Angela shook her head. The appearance of construction is enough, she said. You created a disturbance. Angela handed me a second notice. This one said I had 10 days to submit proof of neighbor notification or the board would file a lien packet. I looked at the notice, then at Angela. You are resetting the deadlines, I said. Every time I respond, you add a new requirement. Angela smiled. The process is iterative, she said. You will learn. I closed the door without responding and went back to my laptop. I opened the Lakeshore Landing Commons rulebook and searched for the neighbor notification requirement. It was there, buried in Section 12, but it said notification was required for permanent structures exceeding 6 feet in height. My fence was 4 feet. I took another screenshot and added it to my evidence folder. That night, I got an email from Diane at the property management company. The subject line said boundary survey results, and the message said the surveyor had completed the initial marking and would return the following week to finalize the measurements. I replied and asked for a copy of the survey report. Diane said the report would be provided to the board first and then shared with affected homeowners after the board had reviewed it. I asked when that would be. Diane said she could not provide a timeline. I called Paul again. He said the delay in sharing the survey was a red flag. If the survey showed that my fence plan was compliant, Angela would not want me to see it until she had time to create a counter-argument. If the survey showed a problem, she would use it to justify the violations. Either way, Paul said, you need to get that survey before the board does. I asked how. Paul said I should contact the surveyor directly and request a copy as the property owner. It was my legal right to see any survey that affected my property. I found the surveyor's contact information on a business card that had been left near the gate stake. I called the number and reached a man named Ed who said he was finishing the Lakeshore Landing project that afternoon. I asked if I could get a copy of the preliminary results. Ed said he usually provided reports to the client, which in this case was the HOA, but he could give me a verbal summary if I met him on site. I said I would be there in 10 minutes. I arrived to find Ed setting up his tripod near the back corner of my property, close to where the survey stake had blocked my gate. He was a middle-aged man with a weathered face and a reflective vest, and he worked with the calm precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times. I introduced myself as the property owner and asked what he had found. Ed said the preliminary measurements showed that my property line extended 2 feet farther south than the HOA had claimed in their original correspondence. That meant my planned fence location, which Angela had said was encroaching on a common area, was actually well within my property boundaries. I felt a surge of relief, but before I could ask more, Angela appeared from around the side of my house. She was walking fast, her gray visor slightly crooked, and she was carrying the same clipboard from earlier. She saw Ed and me standing together and her expression hardened. What are you doing? She said, looking at me. This is an association survey. You are not authorized to interfere. Ed straightened up from the tripod and said, I am speaking with the property owner, which is standard practice. Angela stepped closer. The association contracted this survey, she said. The results belong to the board. Ed shook his head. The survey measures his property, he said. He has a right to understand the findings. Angela tried to move toward the tripod, and for a second I thought she was going to bump it. Ed stepped in front of her and held up one hand. Do not touch the equipment, he said, his voice calm but firm. This is calibrated, and any movement will compromise the measurements. Angela stopped, her face flushed. I am the HOA president, she said. I have oversight of this project. Ed nodded. You are the client, he said. But this is still his property, and I am explaining the results to him as a courtesy. If you have concerns, you can review the full report when I submit it. Angela turned to me. You are interfering with official HOA business, she said. I will make an example out of you so everyone learns. I met her eyes and said nothing. Ed finished adjusting the tripod and said, the measurements are clear. The property line is 2 feet south of where your previous correspondence indicated. That means the planned fence location is compliant. Angela shook her head. That is not what the board was told, she said. Someone gave you wrong information. Ed shrugged. I measure what is on the ground, he said. The markers do not lie. Angela walked back toward the front of my house, her clipboard clutched tight. Ed watched her go, then turned to me. "She is not happy," he said. I asked if he could put the property line findings in writing. Ed said he would include it in the full report, which he would submit to the HOA and copy to me by the end of the week. I thanked him and went inside, my mind already working through what this meant. If Angela had been using a false property line to justify the violations, and the survey proved her wrong, then everything she had said about setback compliance was fabricated. That night, I sent an email to every homeowner in Lakeshore Landing Commons. I used the community email list that was supposed to be for neighborhood announcements, and I attached 3 things: my original fence application, the acknowledgement email from the property management company, and a summary of the survey findings that Ed had shared with me. I explained that the HOA had accused me of violating setback rules based on incorrect property line information, and that the survey had proven my fence plan was compliant. I ended the email by saying I was requesting a formal review of the board's handling of my application and asking other homeowners to review their own property records to ensure they were not being misled. I hit send and closed my laptop. The next morning, I woke up to 17 replies. Some were supportive, saying they had experienced similar issues with Angela and the board. Others were cautious, asking for more details before they took a position. 3 were hostile, accusing me of creating drama and wasting everyone's time. But the overall tone was clear. People were paying attention now. Angela could not control the narrative anymore. At 10 in the morning, Diane from the property management company called me. She said the board had scheduled an emergency meeting for that evening to address my email and the survey results. I asked if I was invited. Diane said homeowners were allowed to attend and speak during the open comment period, but the board would deliberate in executive session. I said I would be there. If you are enjoying this story, hit that like button and subscribe so you never miss another wild HOA tale. The meeting was held in a conference room at the community center near the mailbox cluster, which was the unofficial courtroom for Lakeshore Landing Commons. Angela sat at the head of the table with 3 other board members: a man named Greg who managed the finance committee, a woman named Susan who handled architectural review, and another man named Tom who rarely spoke. About 12 homeowners filled the chairs along the walls, and I sat in the back with my folder of evidence on my lap. Angela called the meeting to order and immediately said the board would address the unauthorized email I had sent to the community list. She said it was inappropriate to share incomplete information and that my actions had caused unnecessary confusion. I raised my hand. Angela ignored me. Susan leaned over and whispered something to Angela. Then Angela sighed and said, "You will have your turn during public comment." I lowered my hand and waited. Greg gave a budget update saying the association was on track for the year but had encountered some unexpected expenses related to landscape maintenance and legal consultations. I noticed he did not provide specific numbers. Tom nodded along and said nothing. When the floor opened for public comment, I stood up and walked to the front of the room. I started by summarizing my fence application, the acknowledgement from the property management company, and the violations Angela had issued. I explained that the survey had proven the property line was 2 feet farther south than the HOA had claimed, which meant my fence plan was compliant with setback rules. I held up the printed survey map packet with no readable text visible and said, "This survey was commissioned by the board, and it contradicts everything President Harris told me." Angela cut me off. "The survey is preliminary," she said. "We have not reviewed the final report." I turned to her. "Then why did you issue violations based on the preliminary property line?" I said. "You told me I was encroaching on common area. The survey says I am not." Angela stood up. "Your accusations are out of line," she said. "The board acts in good faith, and we rely on the best information available." I shook my head. "You relied on incorrect information," I said. "And when the survey proved you wrong, you tried to delay sharing it with me." Angela slammed her hand on the table. "This meeting is not a trial," she said. "You do not get to interrogate the board." I stayed calm. "I am not interrogating," I said. "I am asking for transparency. If the board issued violations based on bad data, homeowners deserve to know." One of the homeowners in the back, a man named Richard who had emailed me that morning, stood up and said, "I would like to see the survey report too. My property shares a boundary with the common area, and I want to make sure the board has the correct measurements. Another homeowner, a woman named Jennifer, said, I was fined last year for a shed placement issue, and no one ever showed me a survey. Maybe my shed was compliant too. Angela looked around the room, her face tight. The survey will be shared when the board has completed its review, she said. Until then, this discussion is premature. I pulled out another document from my folder. This is an email from the city planning office, I said. I requested confirmation of the setback ordinance for residential fences in Albany. According to the city, the minimum setback for a 4-foot fence on a residential lot is 18 inches from the property line. My planned fence is 3 feet from the line. That means even if the survey had supported your original claim, I would still be compliant. Angela stared at me. You went to the city, she said, without board approval. I nodded. I wanted to make sure I understood the actual rules, I said, not just the HOA interpretation. Angela sat down slowly. The board interprets covenants, she said. The city ordinance is a separate matter. I shook my head. The city ordinance supersedes HOA rules if the HOA tries to impose stricter limits without proper authority, I said. And according to the city, the HOA does not have that authority unless it is written into the covenants. I filed a records request with the management company, and the covenants do not mention fence setbacks at all. The room went quiet. Greg leaned over and whispered something to Angela. Susan flipped through a binder. Tom stared at the table. I held up a printed email with no readable text visible. This is the city's response, I said. It is dated 3 days ago. I am happy to share it with anyone who wants a copy. I swallowed my anger, because I knew the moment to use it was coming. This was not the moment. The moment was when I deployed the trump card I had been holding. Angela had been resetting deadlines and fabricating violations, but she had also made a mistake. She had put her lies in writing. And I had proof. I turned to the board. I also requested a copy of the minutes from the meeting where my fence application was reviewed, I said. Diane provided them yesterday. According to the minutes, the board voted to approve my application on March 8th. Angela said the application was still under review, but the minutes say it was approved 3 weeks ago. Greg looked at Angela. Angela looked at the ceiling. Susan said, that is not possible. The minutes must be wrong. I shook my head. I have the signed copy, I said. It is on file with the management company. Angela stood up again. Those minutes were draft, she said. They were not final. I asked Diane if the minutes were final. She said they were certified and submitted to the state as required by association bylaws. Angela opened her mouth, then closed it. I continued. If the board approved my application, then every violation you issued was invalid, I said, and every fine you assessed was fraudulent. I want a full refund, a written apology, and a review of every other violation you have issued in the past year to see if you did this to anyone else. The room erupted. Richard stood up and said he wanted his shed fine reviewed. Jennifer said she wanted her landscaping fine reviewed. Another homeowner said he had been threatened with a lien for parking violations and wanted to see the proof. Angela tried to restore order, but the board members were talking over each other. Greg said he had not seen the final minutes. Susan said she had not voted to approve my fence. Tom finally spoke and said, I remember voting yes, but Angela said we were tabling it. Angela turned to Tom. We did table it, she said. Tom shook his head. No, he said. You told us we were voting to approve with conditions. I voted yes. Susan said the same thing. Greg said he abstained because he was confused about the motion. Angela looked at me, then at the homeowners, then back at the board. The meeting is adjourned, she said. We will reconvene after we review the records. I stepped forward. No, I said. I want this resolved tonight. I want a vote right now on whether the violations were valid, and I want it recorded in the minutes so it cannot be changed later. Paul, the mediator, had told me that if I wanted to force accountability, I had to create a moment where the board could not avoid the truth. This was that moment. I turned to the homeowners. I am requesting a formal motion, I said. Any homeowner can make a motion during a meeting if it relates to board conduct. I move that the board vote to rescind all violations issued to me, refund all fines, and conduct an audit of Angela Harris's handling of violation records. Richard seconded the motion immediately. Angela tried to shut it down. That is not proper procedure, she said. Motions require advance notice. I pulled out the association bylaws. Section 9, I said. Emergency motions related to fiduciary duty can be introduced during any meeting if a majority of attending homeowners support it. How many homeowners are here? 12 hands went up. I need 7 to support the motion. 11 hands went up. Angela looked at the board. The motion is out of order, she said. Greg cleared his throat. Actually, Angela, he said. If 11 homeowners are supporting it, we have to vote. It is in the bylaws. Angela glared at him. Susan nodded slowly. Tom said, let us vote and move on. Angela sat down hard. Fine, she said. All in favor of rescinding the violations. Greg raised his hand. Susan raised her hand. Tom raised his hand. Angela did not move. The motion passes, Greg said. I felt the tension in my chest release for the first time in weeks. Angela stood up, her face pale. This is not over, she said. You are interfering with board authority, and I will make sure the management company understands that. I looked at her and said, your camera does not matter. The minutes are the truth. The room went silent. Angela realized what I had just said. It was her line, thrown back at her. She opened her mouth, then closed it. She picked up her clipboard and walked out of the conference room. The board members sat in stunned silence. Greg cleared his throat and said, we will need to schedule a follow-up meeting to address the audit. Susan said, I think we also need to review the financial records. There have been some questions about landscape expenses. Tom said, I agree. The homeowners started talking all at once, and I stayed at the front of the room, my folder of evidence still in my hand. The next day, Ed the surveyor sent me the full survey report. It confirmed everything he had told me on site. My property line extended 2 feet farther south than the HOA had claimed. My fence plan was compliant, and there was no encroachment on common area. I forwarded the report to Diane and copied every homeowner on the community email list. I also forwarded it to the city planning office and asked them to confirm that my fence permit application, which I had submitted separately to the city, was approved. 2 days later, Diane called me and said the board had voted to issue a full refund of all fines and to withdraw all violations. She also said the board had voted to request an independent audit of the association's finances and violation records. I asked if Angela was still president. Diane said Angela had submitted her resignation effective immediately, citing personal reasons. I thanked Diane and hung up. But the story did not end there. A week later, I received a call from the New York State Department of State, Division of Consumer Protection. An investigator named Mark said they had received multiple complaints about the Lakeshore Landing Commons Association and were opening a case file. He asked if I was willing to provide documentation. I said yes and sent him everything: my application, the acknowledgement email, the survey report, the city ordinance confirmation, the meeting minutes, the notices Angela had issued, and the email thread with Diane. Mark said they would review the materials and follow up. 3 weeks later, the state investigator called again. He said their review had identified multiple violations of HOA governance standards, including improper fine assessment, failure to provide required notice, misrepresentation of covenant terms, and potential financial mismanagement. He said the association had agreed to settle by refunding all affected homeowners, revising their violation procedures, and conducting a third-party audit. He also said Angela Harris had been removed from all leadership roles and was prohibited from serving on the board for 5 years. I thanked him and hung up, feeling a weight lift. The audit results came out 2 months later. It turned out Angela had been approving landscape contracts to a vendor owned by her brother-in-law, and the invoices were inflated by nearly 30%. The board had never voted on the contracts, and Angela had been signing approval forms without disclosure. The missing HOA money was not missing. It was being funneled to a family business. The vendor relationship was canceled immediately, and the association filed a civil claim to recover the overcharges. As for my fence, I finished the installation in early May. The contractor came back with the full load of materials. We set the posts, attached the panels, and installed the gate. The project took 3 days. No one from the HOA said a word. The fence was 4 feet tall, 3 feet from the property line, and fully compliant with every rule that actually existed. I stood in my backyard on the evening we finished, holding the same gate hinge I had been holding the day Angela first showed up, and I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. The fence was not just a fence. It was proof that you could fight back, that documentation mattered, and that bullies like Angela could be stopped if you were willing to stand your ground. The neighborhood changed after that. A new board was elected, and they hired a different property management company. The violation procedures were rewritten to include clear timelines, mandatory notice, and an appeals process. The community email list became a place for actual communication instead of threats, and Angela moved out of Lakeshore Landing Commons 6 months later. I saw the moving truck pull up one Saturday morning, and I watched from my kitchen window as she loaded boxes into the back. She did not look at my house. She did not look at anyone. She just left. I still work as a pest control technician, and I still keep detailed service logs. But now I also keep detailed HOA logs, every email, every notice, every conversation. Because I learned that in a fight with someone who lies, the truth is your only weapon. And the truth is always in the details. Thanks for watching, and I will catch you next time.